Anyway, Michael, what do we do here? This is rumbling on and on and on and on. We don't seem to be getting any closer to resolving it. What's next?
Well, I mean, it's been described as sort of a fisheries war. It's not really a war. It's a one-sided onslaught from the French, from a Emmanuel Macron government who seem to be increasingly hostile towards Brexit UK. Perhaps that's because Macron, all the main challenges to him in France for the French presidency are standing as Eurosceptics now, so that's obviously rattled his government a bit. But I think, you know, people need to bear in mind, the UK already showed that we'd granted 96% of French licences requested, which I already think is way far too generous. But the French came back with more threats of blockades, and of course we've seen the French government talk about cutting energy supplies and things like of this nature as well. And then the British government, for some reason, have decided to bend over backwards over the weekend. And after that 96% of licences granted to the French, they've granted them even more. And what do we get in response? We now get even more threats and a French blockade potentially in the run-up to Christmas. I think the government are being far too soft on this. Instead of handing the French more licences, I think they need to tell them to pack it in now, or we're going to start revoking fishing licences if they don't wind it in a bit.
But surely, though, isn't it just even simpler than that? You've got a criteria to meet, one of which, by the way, is things like, have you been able to prove, or are you able to prove that you've fished in these waters pre the Brexit stuff? If people meet that criteria, whether it's 96% or 100% or 10%, surely the question should just be, do you meet this criteria, yes or no? And if you do, and that's the criteria that both sides of you have agreed to, then the percentage is irrelevant.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. But as I said, the British government have already been incredibly generous. 96%, I repeat the point. Virtually every application from the French, and I think it was 98%, from all EU vessels have been granted. And yet we get this consistent diet of threats, of the ramping up of what's going to happen in the run-up to Christmas. And I repeat the point, I think the time has come now for the government, rather than continuing to dish out licences, tell them to dial down the rhetoric, dial down the threats. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And if you don't stop, in fact, you're going to have licences taken away. Because if they're whinging and complaining so much about having 96% plus granted, let's see how they like 0% access.
Yeah, and Joe, I mean,